I was 63 years old when my son asked me to move in with him, and I thought it was the kindest thing anyone had ever offered me. My husband had passed 8 months before, a heart attack, quick and merciless. The way the doctors say is peaceful, even though nothing about losing the person you built your entire life with feels peaceful at all. We'd been married for 31 years. He was the one who made coffee every morning before I was even awake. He was the one who knew which side of the bed I needed to sleep on and why I couldn't watch sad movies on Sundays. When he was gone, the house in Dayton felt like a museum of a life I no longer had access to. So when my son called me that October, his voice warm, careful, the way he used to sound when he was asking permission for something as a teenager, I listened. He said he and his wife were overwhelmed. They'd just had a baby, their first, a little girl named Wren. He said he was working longer hours now to cover the mortgage and the new expenses, and his wife was exhausted and needed help during the day. He said, "Mum, we have a whole finished basement. It has its own bathroom. You'd have your own space. And honestly, we miss you." I cried. "I'm not ashamed of that." I said yes before he even finished the sentence. "I want you to understand something about my son. He was never a difficult child. He was the one who called me every Sunday without fail, who drove 4 hours to Dayton when his father was in the hospital that first scare 2 years before the real one. He married a woman I thought was lovely, quiet, organized, always remembered my birthday. I had no reason to doubt either of them. I had every reason to trust. That's the part that still catches in my throat when I think about it now. I moved in the second week of November. I sold most of my furniture, no room for it in the basement, kept the things that mattered, a cedar chest that had belonged to my mother, my sewing chair, the framed photo from our 30th anniversary trip to Savannah. I put the rest in storage, signed the lease on my Dayton house over to a property management company, and drove 6 hours to Columbus with my car loaded and my heart genuinely hopeful for the first time since the funeral. Wren was 10 weeks old when I arrived, tiny, dark-haired. She had my son's nose and her mother's serious expression, and the first time I held her, she grabbed my finger in her fist and I felt something in me loosen that had been clenched since August. The first few weeks were good. I would come upstairs in the mornings around 7, take Wren so my daughter-in-law could sleep another hour or two. I'd feed her, change her, walk her around the kitchen singing old Carole King songs she definitely didn't understand, but seemed to find acceptable. My son would come down for coffee before work and we'd sit together for 20 minutes the way we used to when he was home from college. It felt, truly, like something healing. I noticed the first small thing in December. I'd ask my son about Thanksgiving, whether we were going to his wife's family or staying home, and he'd gotten a look on his face I didn't recognize. Distracted, almost irritated, he said, "We'll figure it out, Mum," and changed the subject. His wife wasn't in the room. Later that evening, I overheard them talking in the kitchen, voices low. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was coming upstairs for a glass of water, but I caught my name and then a number. 200,000. I stopped on the stairs. I didn't hear the rest. By the time I got to the landing, they'd gone quiet. I poured my water and went back downstairs and told myself I'd misheard, or that it was something ordinary. A life insurance payout, maybe. We'd had a policy, and my husband's portion had gone to me. $220,000 sitting in a money market account at Fifth Third Bank. My son knew about it. I'd mentioned it once in passing when I was trying to organize everything after the funeral. I told myself it was nothing. I was good at that for a while. By January, I noticed I was tired in a way that didn't match what I was doing. I wasn't sleeping poorly, or at least I didn't think I was. I'd go to bed at 10, wake up at 7, and still feel like I was moving through water all morning. I mentioned it to my son, and he said it was probably grief, that the body holds on to loss longer than we expect. He said it so gently and so knowledgeably that I believed him. His wife had started making my evening tea. It was a small thing. A kind thing, I thought. She'd bring it down to the basement around 8:30, a mug of chamomile with honey, and sometimes sit with me for a few minutes before going back up. I'd assumed it was her way of connecting. We'd never been particularly close. She was a private person, not cold, just self-contained, and I'd taken her effort as a sign that things were settling into something real. I drank the tea every night. I started sleeping 12, sometimes 13 hours. The second thing I noticed was my phone. I keep a simple life financially. I have my checking account, my savings, the money market from the insurance. I check my accounts every Sunday morning. Habit from when my husband and I used to do it together. Review the week, make sure everything was balanced. In February, I noticed a transfer I didn't remember making, $400, moved from checking to an account I didn't recognize. I thought I must have done it accidentally, maybe tapped something wrong on the app. I called the bank, and the woman on the phone said the transfer had been authorized through my online banking from my device. My device? I sat with that for 3 days before I let myself understand what it might mean. I want to tell you that I confronted them immediately, that I was sharp and decisive the way people are in movies. I wasn't. I was 63 years old and I had just lost my husband, and these were my people, my son, my grandchild. I kept finding reasons it was a mistake, a glitch, something I'd done in my sleep, which didn't make any sense, but which I kept offering to myself as a comfort. Then I found the paperwork. It was a Saturday in early March. My daughter-in-law had taken Ren to her mother's for the day, and my son was supposedly at his office catching up on work. I came upstairs to do laundry. My machine was still being repaired, and they'd told me to use theirs. And I went through the kitchen to the laundry room, and I saw a folder on the counter. It was thick, cream-coloured, with a rubber band around it. The name of a law firm was printed on the tab. I should have left it alone. I couldn't. Inside was a document I had to read 3 times before I understood what I was holding. It was a financial power of attorney drafted in my name, authorizing my son to manage my accounts, sell assets on my behalf, and make financial decisions in the event that I was unable to act independently due to cognitive or physical incapacitation. It was dated 6 weeks earlier. At the bottom, on the signature line, was something that looked like my handwriting. It was not my signature. I knew my own signature. I'd signed my name the same way for 40 years, a specific loop on the capital letter, a particular slant my 3rd grade teacher had corrected, and I'd kept out of stubbornness. What was on that page was close. Close enough that I stood there convincing myself for a full minute that maybe I'd signed it. Maybe they'd shown it to me during one of those mornings when I was so exhausted I could barely see straight. But I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. I took pictures of every page with my phone. I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it, rubber band and all, and I went downstairs. I didn't cry. I'm not sure why. I think some part of me had already started doing the math, had already been doing it for weeks without letting myself name it. That evening, I didn't drink the tea. I told my daughter-in-law I'd already made myself something, showed her a mug of plain hot water with a lemon slice. She looked at me for just a second too long, and then she said, "Okay, just wanted to make sure you had it," and went back upstairs. I lay in bed that night, fully awake, for the first time in months. My mind was clear in a way it hadn't been since November, and that clarity was its own kind of answer. I started keeping a record. I have a small notebook, one of those black and white composition ones, the kind from the drugstore, and I started writing down everything, dates, times, anything that had seemed off. The overheard conversation in December, the transfers, the folder, the fog that had lifted the first night I skipped the tea. I wrote it all out in my small handwriting, the handwriting I'd had for 40 years, and I kept the notebook in the cedar chest under my mother's old quilts where I knew no one would look. I called my bank from a parking lot 3 blocks away and put a security freeze on all 3 of my accounts. The woman walked me through it without asking why, bless her, and I sat in my car afterward with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Not from fear, from something else. The specific fury of a person who trusted absolutely and found the trust was a door someone had been quietly picking the lock of for months. I bought a small security camera online. One of those indoor ones, battery operated, no bigger than a hockey puck, and I set it up on the bookshelf in my basement room facing the door. I told myself I was probably wrong about everything, and I was going to have to live with the embarrassment of having suspected my own child. I was not wrong. On the 14th of March, at 11:40 at night, I woke up to the soft sound of my basement door opening. I was awake, had been lying there reading, actually, which was something I hadn't done in months, and which was now, without the tea, entirely possible. I set my book down and lay still. The door opened slowly, without a knock, without a light. My daughter-in-law came in. She was wearing dark clothes and carrying something in her hand. I could hear her moving in the dark, and then the lamp by the armchair clicked on at its lowest setting. She had papers. She set them on the nightstand beside me, watching my face. I kept my eyes closed, breathing slow, and even the way my husband used to when he didn't want to be woken up. I'd practiced this in my head. I didn't know if I could do it. My heart was slamming. She stood there for almost 4 minutes. I know because I counted. Then she took something from her pocket. I heard the cap of a small bottle, and I felt her lift my hand very carefully and guide it across the pages. She was forging my signature while I was in bed. She thought I was sleeping. She thought I was sleeping because I'd been drinking the tea, because for months she had been giving me something that knocked me out at 8:30 every night and kept me dragging through every morning, and tonight was supposed to be no different. I kept my eyes closed until I heard the door click shut behind her. Then I sat up and I picked up my phone and I opened the camera app. The footage was clear, every second of it. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time. Ren was asleep upstairs. My son, I realized, was probably asleep too, or pretending to be. I thought about going up there that minute, confronting both of them, demanding answers. I thought about calling my son's name and asking him to look me in the eye and tell me what they'd been doing. Instead, I called my sister in Cincinnati. She answered on the third ring, groggy and confused, and I said, "I need you to come get me. Tonight, right now. Don't ask me anything yet, just come." She didn't ask. She got in her car at midnight and drove 2 hours, and I had my cedar chest, 2 suitcases, and my composition notebook ready by the time she pulled into the driveway at 2 in the morning. I left everything else. We went to her house, and I sat at her kitchen table and I showed her the camera footage and the photos of the documents and the bank transfer records I printed at the library 3 days earlier. I watched her face go through everything, confusion, disbelief, and then a slow, hard anger that settled into her jaw like something permanent. She said, "We're calling the police in the morning." We did. The detective who handled the case was thorough and patient in the way that matters, the way where they actually listen. She asked me to walk her through everything from the beginning, and she didn't hurry me or suggest I was misremembering. Forensic accountants examined my accounts and found that over 4 months, a total of $11,000 had been moved out of my checking account in transfers, small enough not to trigger automatic alerts. The power of attorney document, when examined by a specialist, showed that the signature was forged. The ink pressure pattern was inconsistent with voluntary signing. They tested the residue in a mug my sister had kept. I'd thought to bring it, and found a sedative compound that is available only by prescription. The prescription was in my daughter-in-law's name. My son, when confronted, said he hadn't known about the sedatives. He said he'd known about the financial plan, that it had been his wife's idea, that she'd told him it was just a protective measure in case something happened to me and they needed to manage things quickly, but that he hadn't known she was drugging me to do it. The detective told me later that this is a common claim. He cooperated with investigators, which was taken into account. I don't know what to do with that. I've thought about it every day for 6 months. He is my son. He stood at a podium at his father's funeral and cried real tears. He also sat across the breakfast table from me every morning while someone was putting sedatives in my chamomile tea. Both of those things are true simultaneously, and I am 63 years old, and I do not have a clean way to reconcile them. My daughter-in-law was charged with elder financial abuse, elder fraud, forgery, and unlawful administration of a controlled substance. She pled guilty to 3 of the 4 charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. She received 4 years with the possibility of parole after 2.5. My son was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud. He received 2 years of probation and mandatory repayment. The judge said he took into account my son's cooperation and his lack of a prior record. I sat in that courtroom and I heard those sentences, and I kept my face very still, the way I'd learned to keep it on the night I lay in the dark, pretending to sleep. The people behind me were not as still. Several of them felt strongly that 4 years was not enough for what she had done. I agreed with them quietly, and then I drove back to my sister's house, where I was still living, and I sat in the chair by the window, and I held my composition notebook in my lap, and I let myself feel it. My accounts had been fully recovered. The freeze I put on in February stopped the larger transfer they had been planning, a wire of $190,000 to an account my daughter-in-law had set up in her maiden name. The forensic accountant said if I hadn't caught it when I did, the money would have been moved within the week. I think about that sometimes. 8 days. I found a small house to rent in a suburb of Cincinnati, 10 minutes from my sister. It has a porch and a yard with a dogwood tree and a kitchen with good light in the mornings. My neighbor brought me a pie the week I moved in, which felt, after everything, almost unbearably generous. I cried in a way I hadn't cried since my husband's funeral, not from grief, but from the relief of ordinary human kindness coming at you without any cost attached. I still think about Wren. She's a year old now, being cared for by my daughter-in-law's mother during the sentence. She doesn't know any of this. She won't for a long time, and maybe some of it she'll never need to know. I sent a birthday card in November, and I don't know if it was given to her, but I sent it. She grabbed my finger in her tiny fist on the day I arrived, and something loosened in me, and that, whatever happened afterward, was real. I am writing this because several people who knew parts of the story asked me to, and because I am a practical person who comes from practical women, my mother, my grandmother, my sister, who drove 2 hours in the dark without asking why, and I believe that if telling what happened to me keeps it from happening to someone else, then it is worth the discomfort of telling. Check your accounts every week. Know your own signature. Pay attention when your body tells you something is wrong, and if someone you love offers you something warm to drink every night at the same time, notice whether you feel like yourself in the mornings after. I trusted completely, and I almost lost everything. I started paying attention, and I didn't. That is the whole of it. I'd spent a lot of time thinking about the night I lay in the dark pretending to sleep while my daughter-in-law stood over me and guided my hand across papers I'd never agreed to sign. And what I keep coming back to, what I can't seem to let go of, is how ordinary the room looked. The same lamp, the same cedar chest by the wall, the same life I trusted myself into. Nothing about it looked like betrayal. That's the thing no one warned you about. It rarely does. What my son and his wife did had a logic to it, the way most wrong things do. They looked at what I had, the insurance money, the years of careful saving, the house sold and the furniture gone, and they made a calculation. They decided that what was mine could become theirs if they were patient enough and quiet enough, and if I slept deeply enough not to notice. That's not a mystery. That's a choice, made deliberately. One small step at a time. And choices like that have a way of running their full course. The freeze I put on my accounts in February stopped a wire transfer that would have emptied nearly everything I had within the week. 8 days, that's the margin. Not luck, paying attention. I think about the version of me who kept drinking the tea, who stayed foggy through March, through spring, through however long it would have taken for the paperwork to be filed, and the damage to be done. That woman wasn't stupid. She was grieving and tired, and she loved her son, and she wanted, more than almost anything, to not be right about what she was beginning to suspect. I understand her completely. I was her for 4 months. What changed wasn't courage exactly. It was a decision to trust what I actually knew over what I wanted to be true. I knew my own signature. I knew my own body. I knew that waking up exhausted after 10 hours of sleep wasn't grief. It was something else. Choosing to act on what I knew, rather than explain it away, was not dramatic. It was quiet. It was a notebook from the drugstore, and a bank call from a parking lot, and a camera the size of a hockey puck on a bookshelf. Small, deliberate things. And then, when the footage was clear and the evidence was in my sister's kitchen, I had to decide what kind of person I was going to be about it. My son is still my son. Ren grabbed my finger the day I arrived. None of that stopped being true, but neither did what they did. Holding both of those things at the same time, without collapsing one to make room for the other. That is, I think, the hardest work I have ever done. Harder than moving. Harder than sitting in that courtroom. I am not the same person I was when I drove to Columbus in November with a car full of good intentions. I am more careful now, and I am not ashamed of that. Careful is not the same as closed. I have a porch and a dogwood tree and a neighbor who brought me a pie. I am building something small and honest and mine. If you are someone who is older and alone and someone you love is offering you help, please take the help. And also check your accounts. Know your own handwriting. Notice how you feel in the mornings. You are allowed to pay attention. You are allowed to act on what you find. The people who love you without a price attached will not be threatened by that.